The wrench slipped from my grip and clattered against the basement floor as Liv's voice cut through the silence like a rusty blade. I'd been fixing the same leaky pipe for the third time this month, hunched over in my workshop where I usually found peace among my tools and half-finished projects. The scent of sawdust and motor oil had always calmed me, but not today. "Eli, we need to talk." Her voice carried that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over our 8 years of marriage, the one that meant she'd already made up her mind about something and was just going through the motions of pretending I had a say. I straightened up slowly, wiping grease from my hands with an old rag. At 38, I still had the build of someone who worked with his hands for a living. My construction company, Parish Building Solutions, kept me in decent shape, though the stress lines around my eyes had deepened considerably over the past year. Let me guess," I said, not bothering to look at her. "You've decided we need new curtains, or maybe you want to repaint the kitchen again." "I'm in love with someone else, just so you know." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I set down the wrench with deliberate care, the metallic clink echoing in the sudden quiet. 30 seconds passed, maybe 40. I counted them. "Perfect," I finally said, turning to face her. That's all I needed to hear. Liv stood at the bottom of the stairs in her designer workout clothes, the kind that cost more than most people made in a week. Her blonde hair was pulled back in one of those messy buns that probably took 20 minutes to achieve the right amount of effortless chaos. She'd been expecting tears, maybe begging, certainly some kind of dramatic reaction. Instead, I walked past her toward the stairs. "Wait, Eli, that's it? That's all you're going to say?" I paused on the third step. "What exactly were you hoping for, Liv? A fight? Some grand gesture to win you back? You just told me you're in love with someone else. Seems pretty straightforward to me." I thought we could talk about this like adults." Adults don't ambush their spouses in basements with announcements about their affairs. I continued up the stairs, hearing her footsteps behind me. Adults have conversations before they start shopping around for replacements. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. In our bedroom, I pulled her suitcase from the closet and began methodically packing her essentials. Underwear, a week's worth of clothes, her expensive skincare products that promised to reverse time itself. She stood in the doorway, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You can't just throw me out of my own house." "Actually, I can." I folded her favorite sweater, the cashmere one I'd bought her for Christmas, and placed it carefully in the suitcase. "The house is in my name. Has been since before we got married, remember? You insisted we keep our finances separate." "But I live here. I have rights." "You had a marriage. You just terminated it." I zipped the suitcase closed and set it by the door. "Your rights ended when you decided to exercise your right to pursue other romantic interests." The next hour was a masterpiece of efficient dissolution. I called the credit card companies and had her removed as an authorized user, changed the locks on both the front and back doors, canceled her gym membership, her spa appointments, even her subscription to that ridiculous lifestyle magazine she never actually read, but left scattered around the house like expensive confetti. Liv spent most of this time alternating between rage and panic, her voice climbing higher with each phone call I made. "You're being completely unreasonable. We should go to counseling, work through this together." "Counseling works when both people want to save the marriage," I said, updating our joint bank account to require dual signatures for any withdrawal over $50. "You've already moved on. I'm just catching up." By evening, her belongings sat on the curb in neat piles. I'd even wrapped her electronics in bubble wrap. No point in being cruel about it. She stood on the sidewalk in the gathering dusk, looking lost and smaller than I'd seen her in years. "Eli, please, can we at least talk about this? I made a mistake." I looked at her through the window, my hand on the new deadbolt. "You didn't make a mistake, Liv. You made a choice. Now you get to live with it." "But I love you too. I'm confused. I need time to figure things out." "Time's up. Figure it out somewhere else." I closed the blinds and poured myself a whiskey, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. My phone buzzed around 10 o'clock, a text from Greta, our neighbor across the street. Greta was 73, had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to know everyone's business before they knew it themselves. "Check your email. Ring camera caught something interesting." The video file showed Liv, a man I recognized as Chase Brandt from his real estate signs around town, and Megan, Liv's oldest friend, huddled together on Greta's front porch 3 hours ago. The audio was crystal clear. He's going to fight this, Liv was saying. Eli's not just going to roll over. Then we stick to the plan, Chase replied. His voice carried that particular brand of arrogance that comes with driving a BMW and wearing suits that cost more than most people's rent. We make him look like the bad guy, controlling husband, financial abuse, maybe even some anger management issues. Megan nodded eagerly. I can back that up. Tell everyone how he's always been jealous, possessive. Sandra will help too. She's never liked him anyway. And if that doesn't work? Liv asked. Chase's smile was visible even in the grainy security footage. Trust me, I know how to handle guys like Eli Parish. Blue-collar tough guys are all the same. Push the right buttons and they'll hang themselves. I watched the video 3 times, taking notes. Then I opened a new document on my computer and began typing. If they wanted to play games, I'd show them what a real strategy looked like. The foundation of their little conspiracy had just developed some serious cracks. The Anchor Inn sat at the edge of town like a weathered bookmark marking the end of respectability and the beginning of honest conversation. Frank Dugan had owned the place for 15 years, ever since he'd retired from the state police and decided that serving drinks was more rewarding than serving warrants. The bar attracted a particular clientele, construction workers, fishermen, and anyone else who preferred their alcohol served without pretension. I'd been coming here once or twice a week since opening my company, usually with Nico Castellanos, my foreman, and the closest thing I had to a best friend. Tonight, I was flying solo. Eli. Frank nodded as I took my usual stool at the far end of the bar. He was already reaching for the bottle of Jameson before I'd settled in. Heard you've had some excitement at home. News travels fast in small towns. Faster than the speed of light when it involves Chase Brandt. Frank poured 2 fingers of whiskey and slid the glass across the scarred wooden bar. That boy's been making waves all over town lately. What kind of waves? Frank glanced around the mostly empty bar, then leaned closer. The kind that leave people high and dry. You know the Hendersons? Owned that little cottage over on Maple Street for 30 years? I nodded. Tom Henderson had worked construction before his back gave out. Good people. Chase convinced them to sell, promised them top dollar and a quick closing. They moved out, started renting a place across town. 2 months later, they're still waiting for their money, and Chase is showing their house to new buyers at twice the price they agreed on. That's not just unethical, it's fraud. Try proving it. Chase has lawyers, connections, and a smile that could sell ice to penguins. Frank polished a glass with more force than necessary. But karma has a way of catching up to people like that. Sometimes karma needs a little help. Frank's smile was barely visible, but it was there. Sometimes it does. I was halfway through my drink when my phone buzzed. Nico's name appeared on the screen. Boss, you need to get down to the yard, now. What's wrong? Just get here, and bring that new security footage from your neighbor. The Parish Building Solutions yard occupied 2 acres of what used to be a lumber mill. I'd bought the property cheap 5 years ago and turned it into the nerve center of my growing business. Equipment storage, a small office trailer, and a workshop where we could handle smaller projects without having to haul everything to job sites. Nico was waiting by my pickup truck, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something darker. At 42, he was built like a fire hydrant. Short, solid, and impossible to move when he didn't want to be moved. He'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to Maine and discovering that civilian life required different skills but the same attention to detail that had kept him alive overseas. What am I looking at? I asked. Your truck's been tampered with. He pointed to the driver's side door. Lock's been picked, and not by an amateur. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. I walked around the truck, checking for obvious damage. Everything looked normal, but Nico had an eye for details that most people missed. Anything missing? That's the weird part. Nothing's gone, but something's been added. He opened the passenger door and pointed to the glove compartment. Found this wedged behind your registration. He held up a small plastic bag containing what looked like marijuana. Not much, maybe an ounce, but enough to cause serious problems if the police found it during a routine traffic stop. Someone's trying to set you up, boss. I took the bag, examining it in the light from the security lamp. Any idea who? Got a pretty good guess. Nico pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Took this around 6 o'clock, about an hour before I found the stuff in your truck. The image showed a figure in dark clothing crouched next to my pickup. The face wasn't clearly visible, but the build and posture were familiar. Chase Brandt. That's what I'm thinking. Question is, what are we going to do about it? I pocketed the bag and considered our options. Going to the police would be the logical choice, but Chase had connections throughout the county. His uncle was a retired judge, his cousin worked for the district attorney's office, and his golf buddies included half the town council. A blue-collar contractor accusing the golden boy of the local real estate scene would need more evidence than a blurry photo and a bag of plant matter. "We're going to catch him in the act," I said finally. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next morning, I called in a favor from Detective Lyle Morrison, Frank's former partner on the state police force. Lyle had retired 2 years ago, but still maintained contacts throughout law enforcement. More importantly, he had a flexible relationship with the rules when it came to helping friends. "You want me to run surveillance on Chase Brandt?" Lyle's voice carried amusement over the phone. "Any particular reason?" "He's been making some questionable business decisions lately. I'm concerned about his impact on the community." "Uh-huh. And this has nothing to do with him sleeping with your wife?" "Ex-wife. And no, this is purely about protecting the integrity of our local business environment." Lyle's laugh was dry as sandpaper. "Right. Well, for the sake of protecting our local business environment, I might be able to keep an eye on things. Unofficially, of course." "Of course." "Give me 48 hours. If Chase Brandt is up to something, I'll find it." I spent the rest of the day working on a kitchen renovation project across town, but my mind kept drifting to the larger puzzle. Liv, Chase, and Megan had a plan, but they were amateurs playing at being masterminds. They'd made their first move with the planted evidence, which meant they were committed to escalating the situation. That evening, I drove to Sandra's yoga studio. Sandra Whitman had been Liv's business partner for 3 years, co-owning the wellness center where Liv taught her fitness classes. They'd started as friends, but had developed the kind of professional relationship that thrived on mutual dependence and barely concealed resentment. Sandra was locking up when I arrived, her movements sharp and efficient. She was the opposite of Liv in almost every way. Dark hair instead of blonde, practical clothes instead of designer labels, and a direct manner of speaking that some people mistook for rudeness. "Eli." She didn't seem surprised to see me. "I wondered when you'd show up. We need to talk." "Yes, we do." She glanced around the empty parking lot. "But not here. Follow me." We ended up at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the conversations were private. Sandra ordered black coffee and got straight to the point. "Liv's planning to destroy you." "I figured that out already. What I need to know is how far she's willing to go." Sandra stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Further than you think. She's convinced herself that you've been controlling and manipulative throughout your marriage. In her mind, whatever she does to you now is justified revenge for years of oppression." Oppression. I tasted the word like something bitter. I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for her lifestyle while she played at being a fitness guru. "I know, but that's not how she's telling the story." Sandra leaned forward. "She's been spreading rumors for weeks, saying you're financially abusive, that you monitor her spending and isolate her from friends. Megan's backing her up, and they're finding people who are willing to believe it." "And Chase?" "Chase has his own agenda. He sees you as an obstacle to his real estate expansion plans. There are 3 properties on your street that he wants to flip, but he can't get the owners to sell while you're there. You're too established, too respected in the neighborhood. So this isn't just about my marriage." "Your marriage was just the opening move." Sandra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Eli, they're planning something bigger. I don't know all the details, but I heard Liv talking to someone on the phone yesterday. She mentioned your business license, some kind of complaint to the state." I felt something cold settle in my chest. A complaint to the state licensing board could shut down my company for months while they investigated. Even if the charges were eventually dismissed, the damage to my reputation would be catastrophic. "Why are you telling me this?" Sandra's smile was bitter. "Because I'm tired of being Liv's supporting actress. She's been taking credit for my work for 3 years, undermining me with clients, and now she wants to drag me into her personal war. I'm done." "What do you want in return?" "Help me buy out her share of the business. I've got some savings, but I need a loan to cover the rest. Your company does well. You could afford to invest in a profitable wellness center." I considered the offer. Sandra was right about the business being profitable, and having an ally inside Liv's circle could be invaluable. But I needed to be careful not to make decisions based on anger. "I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." I drove home through empty streets, my mind working through the implications of what Sandra had told me. Liv and her allies were escalating faster than I'd anticipated, which meant I needed to accelerate my own timeline. Back in my workshop, I opened the laptop and began researching Chase Brandt's business dealings. If he was as dirty as Frank suggested, there would be a paper trail somewhere. It just required knowing where to look. By 3 a.m, I'd found 6 different property deals where Chase had used questionable tactics. Elderly sellers pressured into quick sales, buyers strung along with false promises, and at least 2 cases where he'd collected deposits for properties he didn't actually own. I printed everything and filed it in a folder labeled Insurance Policy. Tomorrow, I'd start building my case. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. They thought they were hunting a wounded animal. They were about to discover they'd cornered a predator instead. The farmers' market occupied the town square every Saturday morning from May through October, transforming the usually quiet space into a bustling carnival of local produce, handmade crafts, and social networking disguised as grocery shopping. I'd been coming here for years, partly to support local businesses and partly because it was one of the few places where you could take the pulse of the entire community in a single morning. Today, I had a specific purpose. I arrived early before the crowds gathered and set up my laptop at one of the picnic tables near the gazebo. The borrowed iPad belonged to Nico's teenage daughter, who'd been happy to loan it out in exchange for $20 and a promise that she could watch whatever happened next. Liv appeared around 9:30, right on schedule. She was working the crowd like a politician, stopping to chat with neighbors, dispensing hugs and concerned looks to anyone who would listen. Megan flanked her like a loyal bodyguard, nodding sympathetically and adding supporting commentary to whatever story Liv was spinning. Chase arrived separately, making his own circuit of the market. He was dressed in carefully casual weekend clothes, khakis, and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries. His smile was perfect, his handshake firm, and his laugh just loud enough to draw attention without seeming forced. I watched them work the crowd for 20 minutes, noting who stopped to talk and who seemed receptive to their performance. Then I opened the laptop and connected it to a portable speaker I'd borrowed from one of my job sites. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, my voice carrying across the square, "could I have everyone's attention for just a moment?" The crowd began to gather, drawn by curiosity and the promise of unexpected entertainment. I recognized most of the faces, neighbors, clients, people I'd known for years. These were the people Liv and her allies were trying to turn against me. My name is Eli Parish, and many of you know me as the owner of Parish Building Solutions. Some of you have probably heard rumors about my recent marital difficulties, and I thought it might be appropriate to address those rumors directly. Liv's face had gone pale, but she was trapped by the crowd that had formed around the gazebo. Chase was pushing through the people, trying to get closer, but Nico appeared from nowhere and blocked his path with a friendly smile and an immovable presence. You see, it turns out that my ex-wife, has been planning to leave me for quite some time, but rather than simply asking for a divorce like an adult, she decided to orchestrate an elaborate campaign designed to destroy my reputation and my business. I tapped the laptop keyboard, and the iPad screen lit up with the first of several text message conversations I'd managed to retrieve. Sandra had been more helpful than I'd initially realized. These are text messages between Liv Parish and Megan Kowalski discussing their plan to spread false rumors about domestic abuse and financial control. A murmur ran through the crowd as people read the messages on the screen. Liv's voice cut through the noise. "Those are private messages. You have no right to." "Actually, I have every right." I turned to face her directly. "Especially when those private messages involve plans to file false reports with state agencies and spread malicious lies about my character." The next screen showed Chase's involvement, including his suggestion about planting evidence and his promise to handle me through his connections in local government. And here we have Chase Brandt, respected local businessman, discussing how to frame me for possession of illegal substances. Chase finally broke free from Nico's polite obstruction and lunged toward the gazebo. "That's enough. You can't prove any of this." He was right, of course. The text messages were real, but I'd obtained them through Sandra rather than any official investigation. In a court of law, they might not be admissible. But we weren't in a court of law. We were in the court of public opinion, and that operated by different rules. Chase's aggressive reaction worked perfectly. Instead of denying the accusations calmly, he'd confirmed them by trying to silence me. The crowd stepped back as he approached, and I could see the shift in their expressions. This wasn't the smooth, confident businessman they knew from his advertising campaigns. This was someone desperate and angry. "Actually, Chase, I can prove it." I held up the plastic bag he'd planted in my truck. "Nico found this in my glove compartment, right after you were caught on security camera tampering with my vehicle." Chase stopped advancing, his face cycling through several emotions before settling on calculation. "You're bluffing. If you had real evidence, you'd have gone to the police." "Who says I haven't?" That was a lie, but Chase didn't know it. He glanced around at the crowd, seeming to realize for the first time how many people were watching, how many phones were recording. His perfect composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to stand here and listen to this." He turned to push through the crowd, but his retreat was blocked by Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose house sale had been sabotaged by Chase's questionable business practices. She was small and gray-haired, but her voice carried clearly across the square. "Is it true about our house, Chase? Have you been lying to us about the sale?" Chase's face flushed red. "That's a completely separate matter, Mrs. Henderson. We can discuss it privately." "We've been trying to discuss it privately for 2 months." Tom Henderson joined his wife, his voice carrying the frustration of someone who'd been pushed too far. "You told us the buyers backed out, but Eli says you're showing our house to new people at a higher price." The crowd's attention shifted to Chase, and I could see him calculating his options. He could try to explain, but that would require admitting to practices that were legally questionable at best. He could deny everything, but the Hendersons were well respected in the community. Or he could double down on aggression. He chose aggression. "I don't have to justify my business practices to a washed-up contractor and his bitter ex-wife." Chase's voice rose to a shout. "This whole thing is just a pathetic attempt to—" He never finished the sentence. In his anger, he'd stepped backward without looking, tripping over a wooden crate of apples and crashing into Martha Kowalski's produce stand. Apples scattered across the pavement, followed by Chase himself, who landed hard on his backside in a pile of organic lettuce. The crowd's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Laughter. Not cruel laughter, but the kind of amused chuckling that follows when someone pompous gets taken down a peg by their own clumsiness. Several phones captured the moment, and I knew that by evening the video would be circulating throughout the town's social media networks. Chase scrambled to his feet, his expensive polo shirt stained with dirt and lettuce leaves. His perfect hair was disheveled, and his face was red with embarrassment and rage. He looked around at the laughing crowd, then at Liv, who was staring at him with obvious disgust. "This isn't over," he said, pointing at me. "No," I agreed. "It's not." He pushed through the crowd and stalked off toward the parking area, leaving Liv and Megan to face the aftermath alone. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people approached me with words of support and offers to help if I needed anything. Greta appeared at my elbow, her eyes bright with excitement. "That was better than cable television, dear. But you know they're not going to just give up, don't you?" "I'm counting on it." Liv tried to salvage the situation, approaching several groups of people with explanations and damage control. But the text messages had been clear, and Chase's reaction had confirmed their authenticity. The narrative she'd been building about me being controlling and abusive had been replaced by a new story, one where she was the manipulator and Chase was the fool. Sandra appeared as I was packing up the laptop. "That was impressive, but you know you've just declared war, right?" "The war started when they decided to destroy my business. I just chose the battlefield." "What's your next move?" I looked across the square to where Liv and Megan were having what appeared to be a heated argument near the parking area. "I wait for them to make theirs. Desperate people make mistakes, and I have a feeling they're about to get very desperate indeed." As I drove home, my phone buzzed with text messages from friends and neighbors who'd witnessed the morning's entertainment. The consensus was clear. Public opinion had shifted decisively in my favor. But I knew this was just the opening round. Liv and Chase were wounded, but not defeated, and wounded animals were often the most dangerous. That evening, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message printed in block letters. "Back off, or you'll regret it." I smiled and added the note to my growing file of evidence. They were escalating right on schedule. The motion sensor light in my workshop triggered at 2:17 in the morning, flooding the yard with harsh white illumination. I'd been expecting this visit for 3 days, ever since the farmers' market confrontation had shifted the balance of our little war. Desperate people did desperate things, and Chase Brandt was nothing if not predictable in his desperation. I watched from my bedroom window as 2 figures moved carefully between the equipment parked in my yard. One was clearly Chase. His height and build were unmistakable even in the shadows. The other was smaller, probably Megan, though I couldn't be certain from this distance. They spent several minutes examining my pickup truck before moving toward the workshop. I'd left the side door unlocked, an invitation they couldn't resist. The security cameras I'd installed after finding the planted evidence would capture everything they did inside, but I had something more immediate in mind. I pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, then crept downstairs to the basement. The workshop had 2 entrances, the obvious side door they'd used, and a connecting passage from the basement that I'd built when I first bought the house. It was designed for convenience during winter months, but tonight it would serve a different purpose. The passage emerged behind a tall storage cabinet filled with paint cans and supplies. Through the gap between the cabinet and the wall, I could see Chase rifling through the filing cabinet where I kept my business records. Megan was at my desk, trying to access my computer. "It's password protected. she whispered. "Keep trying. We need those client files." "What exactly are we looking for?" Chase paused in his search through my papers. "Anything we can use. Tax irregularities, safety violations, unhappy customers. There's got to be something in here that will give us leverage. And if there isn't, then we plant something. A few forged documents, maybe some photos of shoddy workmanship from other job sites. People will believe what they want to believe." I'd heard enough. I stepped out from behind the cabinet, my presence announced by the deliberate scrape of my boots on the concrete floor. "Find anything interesting?" Both intruders spun toward me, their faces showing identical expressions of shock and panic. Chase recovered first, his natural arrogance reasserting itself despite the circumstances. "Eli, we were just breaking and entering, attempted theft, conspiracy to commit fraud." I moved closer, noting how Megan shrank back while Chase stood his ground. "Should I call the police now, or do you want to explain yourselves first?" "You can't prove anything," Chase said, but his voice lacked conviction. I gestured toward the corners of the workshop, where the small security cameras were clearly visible. "Actually, I can prove everything. Audio and video, high definition, automatically uploaded to cloud storage. Even if you destroyed the cameras now, the evidence is already preserved." Megan made a small sound that might have been a whimper. "Chase, you said there wouldn't be any cameras." "Shut up, Megan." "Don't talk to her like that," I said, my voice dropping to something colder. "In fact, don't talk at all. You're in my workshop, uninvited, going through my private files. The only reason I haven't called the police is because I want to hear what you thought you'd accomplish here." Chase straightened his shoulders, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "We know you've been harassing Liv, following her, threatening her friends. This was just self-defense? Investigation? Vigilante justice?" I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Chase, you planted drugs in my truck. You conspired to file false reports with state agencies. You've been running real estate scams all over town, and now you're standing in my workshop at 2 a.m, going through my files, and you want to claim moral high ground?" "That's all circumstantial. Hearsay. You can't prove any of it in court." "Maybe not, but I don't need a court conviction to destroy your reputation." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. One button, and the video of tonight's adventure gets sent to every contact in my phone. Your clients, your business partners, your golf buddies at the country club. How do you think they'll react to seeing their trusted real estate agent breaking into someone's workshop? The color drained from Chase's face. "You wouldn't." "Try me." Megan stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Please, Eli, this wasn't my idea. Chase said it would be simple, just look around, maybe take some photos. I didn't know about the other stuff." "What other stuff, Megan?" She glanced at Chase, who was glaring at her with undisguised fury. "The drugs, the fake reports, all of it. I thought we were just trying to help Liv get a fair divorce settlement. And now? Now I think I made a terrible mistake." She was crying, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt. Liv was so upset, and she said you'd been controlling her for years, and I believed her because she's my friend." "Or some friend," I said. "She got you to commit felonies based on lies." Chase had been growing more agitated during this exchange, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Enough. This is ridiculous. You think you can intimidate me with some amateur surveillance footage? I have lawyers, connections. I'll bury you in legal fees before this is over." "Is that a threat, Chase?" "It's a promise." He took a step toward me, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was bigger than me, younger by a few years, and probably thought his gym membership gave him some kind of advantage. What he didn't know was that I'd spent 20 years working construction, where physical confrontations were settled quickly and decisively. I didn't wait for him to make the first move. Instead, I grabbed a paint can from the nearby shelf, a full gallon of interior latex, still unopened, and hurled it with all the force I could muster. Chase ducked, but not quickly enough. The can caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into a rack of tools. "Self-defense," I said calmly as Chase struggled to regain his footing. "You threatened me in my own workshop after breaking in. Any jury in the world would understand." Chase pulled himself upright, his shoulder clearly paining him. "You're insane." "No, I'm thorough." I picked up another paint can, testing its weight. "And I'm tired of playing games with amateurs." Megan was pressed against the wall, watching our confrontation with wide, frightened eyes. "Stop it, both of you. This has gone too far." "It went too far when your friend decided to destroy my marriage and my business," I replied, not taking my eyes off Chase. "Everything since then has just been consequences." Chase straightened his shirt and tried to reassemble his dignity. "Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. But don't come crying to me when you lose everything. I already lost everything that mattered. That makes me dangerous, Chase. I have nothing left to lose, while you have a reputation, a business, a lifestyle that depends on people respecting you. Who do you think has more to fear in this situation? He didn't answer, but I could see the understanding in his eyes. He'd made the classic mistake of thinking that because I worked with my hands, I was somehow less intelligent than him. Now he was beginning to realize that intelligence came in many forms, and street smarts often trumped book learning when things got personal. Get out, I said. Both of you. And Chase, if I find you on my property again, I won't bother with conversation. They left through the side door, Megan practically running, while Chase maintained a facade of dignity despite his obvious pain. I watched them from the window until their car disappeared down the street, then returned to assess the damage to my workshop. The filing cabinet had been thoroughly searched, papers scattered across the floor. My computer showed signs of attempted access, though the password protection had held. Most importantly, the security cameras had recorded everything, providing clear evidence of their illegal entry and their stated intentions to plant false evidence. I spent the next hour organizing the scattered papers and reviewing the camera footage. The audio quality was excellent, capturing not only their admission of breaking and entering, but also Chase's threats and Megan's confession about the broader conspiracy. By 4 a.m, I had edited the footage into a concise 10-minute video that told the complete story of the night's events. I uploaded it to a private server and sent copies to Detective Morrison and Sandra, along with instructions not to share it unless something happened to me. Then I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had always brought me peace. The space felt violated by their presence, but that would pass. What mattered was that they'd made their next move, and it had been even more desperate and poorly planned than I'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This isn't over." I typed back, "I'm counting on it." The war was escalating, but I was winning. Chase and his allies were reacting impulsively, driven by anger, desperation, and their need to control the situation. Meanwhile, I was calmly assessing every move, thinking 3 steps ahead. They believed they could destroy me with lies, manipulation, and emotional tactics, but what they failed to grasp was that they had vastly underestimated my ability to outthink them. They were emotional. I was calculated, prepared to strike when the time was right, not before. Their moves were reckless, and my own moves were strategic, designed to dismantle their efforts without them even realizing it. Tomorrow marked the beginning of the next phase in this battle, and I was ready. But for tonight, I would allow myself a moment of satisfaction, knowing that I had already orchestrated the downfall of their carefully constructed web of lies. The look on their faces when the truth finally came to light would be priceless. I had everything set up, a high-definition video that would expose their true intentions for all to see. The foundation of their conspiracy was crumbling, and they had no idea how close they were to losing everything. I wasn't just playing defense, I was launching a calculated offensive, and they were too blind to see it coming. Judge Patricia Kavanaugh was a force to be reckoned with in her courtroom. Renowned for her ability to run a tight ship, she commanded respect from every lawyer, defendant, and plaintiff who entered her courtroom. She had no tolerance for drama or theatrics, only efficiency and justice. At 62, she had witnessed every kind of manipulation and emotional outburst imaginable. She had seen it all, and over the years, her patience for games had evaporated, especially in family court where the stakes were high and emotions often ran rampant. By the time she reached her 10th year on the bench, she had developed an almost intuitive understanding of who was playing a game and who was telling the truth, and that made her the ideal audience for what was about to unfold. Liv, sitting at the plaintiff's table, had enlisted the help of Jessica Torres, a young and ambitious attorney known for her aggressive representation of women in divorce cases. Torres had built her career on helping wronged wives navigate contentious divorces, using every emotional and sympathetic angle at her disposal. Her style was direct and confrontational, often appealing to judges who were more inclined to sympathy than reason. Unfortunately for her, Judge Kavanaugh was no such judge. Kavanaugh was a stickler for procedure, and she wasn't easily swayed by emotional pleas. Torres was about to find out that her usual tricks wouldn't work here. I sat alone at the defendant's table, having made the controversial decision to represent myself. I had chosen this route deliberately, and my decision had already raised a few eyebrows among the court staff and other legal professionals. Most would consider it a mistake for someone in my position to go without representation, especially in a case as heated as this. But I had my reasons, personal reasons that made me believe I had the upper hand. I wasn't just prepared to fight, I had already won in my mind. I knew exactly what was at stake and was fully aware of how the game was played. At this stage, I didn't need a lawyer, I needed control, and I was taking it. Mrs. Parish, Judge Kavanaugh began, her voice steady and commanding, you filed a motion for emergency spousal support and exclusive use of the marital residence. Please explain the circumstances that require emergency intervention. Liv rose from her seat, straightening her dress. A conservative, perfectly selected outfit designed to convey both vulnerability and respectability. She knew how to play the victim card, and she was pulling out all the stops. Your Honor, I've been forced to leave my home due to my husband's increasingly erratic and controlling behavior. He changed the locks, canceled my credit cards, and has been threatening me through intermediaries. Her voice quivered with just the right amount of fear, but her eyes told a different story, one of carefully crafted deceit. What kind of threats, specifically? Judge Kavanaugh asked, her pen poised over her legal pad, ready to make her notes. Liv hesitated for just a moment, then continued with dramatic flair. He's been following me around town, confronting my friends, and last week he orchestrated a public humiliation at the farmer's market, where he displayed private text messages and made false accusations about my character. She looked directly at the judge, a look of pleading in her eyes, as if expecting her words to move the court into action. Judge Kavanaugh made a quick note, but her expression remained neutral, unfazed by Liv's attempt to paint a picture of victimhood. Her eyes shifted to me. Mr. Parish, how do you respond to these allegations? I felt the weight of her gaze, but I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this moment. I stood, holding a manila folder that contained the fruits of 3 weeks' worth of careful preparation. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Parish's allegations are not only false, but part of a broader conspiracy to defraud this court and destroy my business reputation. Attorney Torres objected immediately. Your Honor, Mr. Parish is not represented by counsel and appears to be attempting to introduce evidence without proper foundation. Ms. Torres, Judge Kavanaugh interrupted, Mr. Parish has the right to represent himself, and I'm curious to hear what evidence he believes supports his position. Proceed, Mr. Parish. I opened the folder and removed the first document. Your Honor, this is a transcript of a conversation recorded on Ring doorbell security camera, showing Mrs. Parish, her friend Megan Kowalski, and Chase Brandt discussing their plan to file false abuse allegations and plant evidence in my vehicle. The transcript was detailed and damning, showing not only the conspiracy, but also the specific roles each participant was supposed to play. Judge Kavanaugh read it carefully, her expression growing more stern with each page. Mrs. Parish, are you familiar with this conversation? Liv's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. Your Honor, that was taken out of context. We were discussing our concerns about my husband's behavior, not planning anything illegal. I see. Mr. Parish, do you have additional evidence? Yes, Your Honor. I produced the next document. This is a police report filed by Detective Lyle Morrison, documenting the discovery of illegal substances that had been planted in my vehicle by Chase Brandt. The report includes security camera footage showing Mr. Brandt tampering with my truck. Torres was on her feet again. Objection. This appears to be a criminal matter that has no bearing on the current divorce proceedings. On the contrary, I interrupted, it demonstrates a pattern of criminal behavior designed to manipulate these proceedings. Mrs. Parish and her co-conspirators have been systematically attempting to create false evidence of abuse and criminal activity. Judge Kavanaugh held up her hand for silence. I'll allow the evidence. Continue, Mr. Parish. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in systematic destruction. I presented the security footage from the workshop break-in, complete with audio of Chase and Megan discussing their plans to plant false evidence. I showed financial records proving that Liv had been systematically draining our joint accounts while claiming financial abuse. Most damaging of all, I played a recording of a phone conversation between Liv and Chase, obtained legally through Sandra's cooperation, where they discussed filing false reports with state agencies to destroy my business license. With each piece of evidence, Liv's story crumbled further. Her attorney tried repeatedly to object, but Judge Kavanaugh was clearly interested in seeing how deep the conspiracy went. Mrs. Parish, the judge said finally, you've accused your husband of controlling and abusive behavior. Yet the evidence suggests that you and your associates have engaged in breaking and entering, planting evidence, filing false reports, and conspiracy to commit fraud. How do you explain this discrepancy? Liv's composure finally broke. He's been manipulating everything. He's turned people against me. He's violated my privacy. He's what, Mrs. Parish? Defended himself against false accusations, gathered evidence of actual criminal behavior, protected his business from fraudulent attacks? Your Honor, Torres interjected desperately, my client has been under tremendous emotional stress. Ms. Torres, your client has been under tremendous legal jeopardy. Judge Kavanaugh's voice was ice cold. The evidence presented here suggests multiple felonies, including conspiracy, breaking and entering and filing false reports. I'm frankly amazed that criminal charges haven't been filed yet. I chose that moment to deliver the final blow. Your Honor, I'd like to present one additional piece of evidence. From the folder, I produced a document that Sandra had provided the previous evening, a detailed financial analysis of Liv's Wellness Center, showing systematic embezzlement of client payments and tax evasion dating back 2 years. This shows that Mrs. Parish has been stealing from her own clients and failing to report income to the IRS. The amounts involved total more than $50,000. The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of Liv's quiet sobbing. Judge Kavanaugh reviewed the financial documents with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. Mrs. Parish, do you have any explanation for these financial irregularities? Liv looked at her attorney, who was clearly realizing that her client had been less than honest about the circumstances of the marriage. Torres whispered something in Liv's ear, but Liv shook her head. I need to think about this. I need time to... Mrs. Parish, Judge Kavanaugh interrupted. You came into my courtroom seeking emergency relief based on allegations of abuse and financial control. Instead, I find evidence that you are the one who has been engaging in financial fraud, criminal conspiracy, and systematic harassment of your estranged husband. Not only am I denying your motion for emergency support, I'm ordering you to show cause why I shouldn't refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The gavel came down with the finality of a coffin nail. Liv's emergency motion was not only denied, but had backfired spectacularly, exposing her to serious criminal liability while simultaneously destroying any sympathy she might have claimed in the divorce proceedings. As we filed out of the courtroom, Torres grabbed my arm. This doesn't end here, Parish. We'll appeal, we'll... Ms. Torres, I said calmly, I'd advise your client to consider a plea bargain. The evidence I presented today is just the beginning. If this goes to trial, she'll face federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Is that really the hill you want to die on? Outside the courthouse, Sandra was waiting by the steps. She'd been subpoenaed as a witness, but hadn't been called to testify. The documentary evidence had been sufficient to make the case. How do you feel? She asked. I considered the question. 3 hours ago, Liv had walked into that courtroom confident that she could manipulate the system to destroy me. Now she was facing potential prison time while I walked away completely vindicated. Like justice actually works sometimes, I said. But even as I savored the victory, I knew this wasn't over. Desperate people became dangerous when cornered, and Liv was now more desperate than she'd ever been. The courthouse had been a decisive battle, but the war was still ongoing. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you've won, but this is just the beginning. I showed the message to Sandra, who shook her head. They never learn, do they? No, I agreed. But that's what makes them predictable. The foundation of their conspiracy had collapsed completely, but I suspected they had one more desperate gambit left in them. And when they played it, I'd be ready. The Anchor Inn was busier than usual for a Tuesday night, filled with the kind of crowd that gathered when word spread about impending drama. Frank had called me an hour earlier with a simple message. They're here, and they're planning something stupid. I arrived to find Liv, Chase, and Megan huddled in the corner booth, their voices low but their body language screaming desperation. 3 days had passed since the courthouse disaster, and they'd clearly spent that time plotting their final move. The rest of the bar was populated by familiar faces, construction workers, fishermen, and longtime residents who'd been following our conflict with the interest usually reserved for sporting events. Greta sat at the bar nursing a glass of wine, her eyes bright with anticipation. Sandra occupied a table near the window, pretending to read, but obviously listening to every word. I took my usual stool and ordered a whiskey. Frank poured it with steady hands, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. They've been here for 2 hours, he murmured, drinking too much and talking too loud. Chase keeps making phone calls, and Liv's been crying on and off. What's the general mood? Frank glanced around the room. Everyone knows about the courthouse. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when it involves fraud charges and criminal conspiracy. I'd say public opinion has shifted pretty decisively in your favor. As if summoned by our conversation, Chase stood up from the corner booth and walked toward the bar. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the desperate bravado of someone with nothing left to lose. His face was flushed from alcohol, and his expensive clothes looked rumpled. Well, well, he said loudly enough for the entire bar to hear. If it isn't Eli Parish, destroyer of marriages and ruiner of lives. The room fell quiet, everyone sensing that the evening's entertainment was about to begin. I turned slowly to face him, my expression calm. Chase, you're looking well. Prison orange is going to be a good color on you. His face darkened. You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you've got everything figured out? I think I've got you figured out. Small-time con man who got in over his head when he decided to mess with someone who actually fights back. Chase moved closer, invading my personal space in a way that was clearly intended to provoke a reaction. You destroyed everything. Liv's business, my reputation, Megan's friendship. For what? Because your wife finally realized she deserved better than a blue-collar loser? I sipped my whiskey, letting the silence stretch. The entire bar was watching now, phones discreetly recording what everyone sensed would be the final confrontation in our ongoing war. Chase, I said finally, you planted drugs in my truck. You broke into my workshop. You conspired to file false reports with state agencies. You defrauded elderly clients out of their life savings. And now you want to blame me because there were consequences? Those are all lies. Really? I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. Because I have video of you admitting to most of it. Audio recordings of you planning the rest. Financial documents showing your fraudulent business practices. Which part exactly is a lie? The color drained from his face as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. But instead of retreating, he doubled down on aggression. You want to know the truth about your precious marriage? His voice rose to a shout. Liv was miserable with you for years. She used to call me crying about how boring and predictable you were, how you had no ambition, no vision for the future. And yet she stayed married to me while sleeping with you. What does that say about your appeal? The crowd's reaction was immediate, a low murmur of amusement that clearly stung Chase's already wounded pride. He glanced around the room, seeing nothing but unsympathetic faces and barely concealed mockery. You people don't understand what really happened here, he continued, his voice getting more desperate. Eli Parish is a manipulative sociopath who systematically destroyed 3 people's lives because his ego couldn't handle being rejected. Greta spoke up from her spot at the bar, her elderly voice carrying clearly across the room. Chase, dear, we all saw the security footage. We heard the recordings. The only sociopath here is the man who plants drugs in someone's truck and then tries to play the victim. That's right, added Tom Henderson, who'd been sitting quietly at a corner table. And we know about our house, too, how you strung us along for months while shopping for higher offers. Other voices joined in, a chorus of grievances and complaints that had been building for months. Chase's business practices had affected more people than I'd realized, and my public exposure of his methods had given them permission to speak up. You're all just jealous, Chase's voice cracked with desperation. Jealous of my success, my lifestyle, my... Your criminal record? I interrupted. Because that's what you're going to have when this is all over. Fraud, conspiracy, breaking and entering, drug possession with intent to distribute. How's that going to look on your real estate license renewal? Chase's face went through several emotions before settling on rage. You sanctimonious piece of... He swung at me, a wild, drunken haymaker that telegraphed itself from across the room. I stepped aside easily, letting his momentum carry him into the bar rail. He bounced off and stumbled backward, catching himself against a table. Self-defense, I said calmly, echoing my words from the workshop confrontation. Everyone saw you throw the first punch. Chase straightened up, his face red with embarrassment and alcohol. This isn't over, Parish. I still have connections, lawyers, people who... Who what? Who'll help you after they've seen the evidence? Chase, your uncle, the retired judge, called me yesterday. He wanted to apologize for his nephew's behavior and assure me that your family won't be interfering with the legal process. That was the final straw. Chase's remaining composure shattered completely. You're lying. Uncle Robert would never... Uncle Robert is a retired judge who values his reputation more than his worthless nephew's freedom. He's seen the evidence, Chase. He knows what you did, and he's not going to risk his own standing to protect you. The fight went out of Chase all at once, his shoulders sagging as the full weight of his situation finally hit him. He looked around the room one more time, seeing nothing but hostile faces and disappointed shakes of the head. Fine, he said quietly. You win, Eli. Congratulations on destroying 3 people's lives over a failed marriage. I didn't destroy your lives, I replied. I just revealed who you really were underneath all the lies and manipulation. The destruction was self-inflicted. Chase walked back to the corner booth where Liv and Megan were waiting. I could see them having a heated conversation, with lots of gesturing and raised voices. Finally, all 3 of them stood up and headed for the exit. But Liv stopped at the bar, turning to face me one last time. I hope you're happy, she said, her voice thick with tears and alcohol. I hope this was worth it. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The perfect hair was disheveled, the designer clothes wrinkled, the confident smile replaced by lines of stress and defeat. This was the woman I'd loved for 8 years, now revealed as someone I'd never really known at all. "Liv," I said quietly, "you could have just asked for a divorce. We could have split everything fairly and gone our separate ways. Instead, you chose to try to destroy me. Every consequence that followed was a direct result of that choice. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You planned it carefully, recruited allies, and executed it systematically. The only thing you didn't plan for was the possibility that I'd fight back." She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps hoping for some sign of forgiveness or reconciliation, but that bridge had been burned too thoroughly to rebuild. "Goodbye, Eli. Goodbye, Liv." She followed Chase and Megan out of the bar, leaving behind a room full of people who'd witnessed the complete collapse of their conspiracy. The silence stretched for almost a minute before Frank broke it. "Well," he said, refilling my glass without being asked, "that was better than cable television?" The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people stopped to offer their support and congratulations. Greta patted my shoulder maternally. Tom Henderson shook my hand, and Sandra raised her wine glass in a silent toast. I sat at the bar for another hour, nursing my whiskey and reflecting on the events of the past month. The war was over, decisively won, but victory felt different than I'd expected. There was satisfaction in seeing justice done, but also a strange emptiness where my anger had been. My phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Morrison. "Charges filed. Chase facing 5 to 7 years if convicted. Liv looking at 2 to 3, Megan cooperating for reduced sentence." I typed back, "Justice served. Indeed. Buy you a drink to celebrate? Already ahead of you." I finished my whiskey and walked out into the cool night air. The town square was quiet, lit by old-fashioned street lamps that cast long shadows on the empty sidewalks. This was my home, my community, and I'd successfully defended it against people who'd tried to destroy me through lies and manipulation. Tomorrow, I'd start rebuilding. The business would recover, new relationships would form, and life would continue. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. I'd been tested in ways I'd never expected, and I'd emerged stronger. The house of cards they'd tried to build around me had collapsed completely, taking its architects down with it. Some structures, once destroyed, could never be rebuilt, and some victories were worth whatever they cost.